In our program, Eternal Life Answers from Science, today it is a great source of satisfaction for me to be able to present my dear friend Álex Gómez-Marín. He is a physicist, a theoretical physicist, and a neuroscientist. My friend Álex, thank you very much for having accepted this invitation. It holds a truly significant importance for me, especially within the overall content of my message. Thank you again, my friend Álex. Álex Gómez-Marín is a physicist, a theoretical physicist, and a neuroscientist. His research focuses on the study of the human mind in the real world, including what he calls the margins of consciousness, a strange and wonderful field where enigma often meets stigma. Álex holds a PhD in theoretical physics from the University of Barcelona. He was a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Genomic Regulation at the Champalimaud Centre for the Unknown in Lisbon. Since 2016, he's been a principal investigator at the Institute of Neurosciences of Alicante. Currently, he is an associate professor at the Spanish National Research Council and also serves as the director of the Pari Center located in the region of Tuscany, Italy. This center is dedicated to the exploration of the intersection between science, art, and the sacred. In 2021, he went through a profound near-death experience, and ever since that time, he has been diligently working to integrate it into both his personal life and his professional career. My dear friend Álex, once again, a truly heartfelt thank you for having accepted this invitation. The medical education we receive at the Faculty of Medicine is founded upon the Cartesian and Newtonian scientific method, the very method I taught my students at the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry of the University of Barcelona, located on the Bellvitge campus, and also to my residents within the surgery department. The Cartesian scientific method studies the macroscopic objective world and is fundamentally based upon a materialist ontology which incorporates dualism, locality, continuity in movement, and a clear determinism. Based on these principles, the structural vision of the human being, according to the Cartesian-Newtonian method, allows us to define it as a body, which is matter, and a mind, encompassing all mental, psychic, memory, consciousness, emotions, and feelings. And from the perspective of the scientific method, all mental activity is considered an epiphenomenon of matter, meaning that it is secondary to metabolic activity, to the biochemical reactions that occur within our neurons. With this objective in mind, Descartes himself defined life as I think, therefore I am. But this also leads to the consequence of physical death, which by the second law of thermodynamics, where everything has a tendency towards disorder, towards entropy, implies death, cellular disorganization, and cellular death. Therefore, our thoughts come to an end. As a consequence, we cease to exist. According to the scientific method, physical death signifies the end of our existence. Throughout my professional career, I have cared for patients diagnosed with clinical death from various causes. In the surgical field, the most common causes are often traumas, severe hemorrhages, acute anemia conditions, septic shock, anaphylactic shock, and even complications arising from very complex perioperative surgeries. These patients, when applying the currently well-protocolized cardiopulmonary resuscitation measures, we managed to recover some of these patients in the first minute, up to 33. My surprise was that some of these patients we revived from clinical death, objectively confirmed by a flat electrocardiogram and a flat electroencephalogram after 15-20 seconds, reported a series of experiences and perceptions that coincided exactly with the time interval during which they were clinically dead. This, logically, went totally against my principles of the Cartesian and Newtonian scientific method. These experiences and occurrences that we define as near-death experiences, very well defined by Bruce Grayson, a professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia, who describes them as subjective, profound experiences possessing a transcendent component which present themselves in patients in a dying state, approaching a definitive conclusion, and that are manifested as an out-of-body experience and which transcend the boundaries of space, time, and the ego. These experiences, or near-death experiences, from a scientific method standpoint, have no justification. The very first question I asked myself regarding this phenomenon was, how can it possibly be that from some biochemical reactions occurring deep inside our neurons, which are essentially just molecules, in other words, purely material particles, from the reaction of physical particles, give us in the first place some psychic manifestations that have no material substrate, but are, for example, memory, consciousness, feelings, thoughts, and memories. I have no scientific reason for this phenomenon. I'm lucky today to have a neuroscientist here, and the first thing I'll ask my friend Álex is, as an expert neuroscientist, is there any scientific explanation that can justify for us, with any demonstrated theory, that biochemical reactions of material molecules within neurons produce psychic phenomena without material substrate, thought, memory, consciousness, etc.?
Is there one?
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks, my friend Álex.
Perhaps one way to answer this question is to, I like to go back to the very beginning of science, or what we now call science or the scientific method. This truly marvelous, incredible, and highly successful way of understanding reality itself that was established 400 years ago, thanks to Galileo. And Galileo did one thing, well, he said many things foundational to understanding science, right? That have to do with the mathematization of reality with experiments, but he also made a separation. And I like to tell it this way. He says something like, in nature, there are two types of things, some that travel in first class and others that travel in second class. What does this mean? That what can be measured and quantified most easily, that's what science will study first. And from that point, there emerged the fields of astronomy, mechanics, physics, biology, and chemistry. And he put aside for later what truly matters most to us as humans, love, pain, the senses. He left it for later, and I believe that we simply forgot about it. And 400 years later, in fact, in the 90s, that's when consciousness began to be studied in laboratories. And throughout this whole journey, science has mixed with materialism, which is a philosophical ideology. And often we think that one thing is the same, that if you do science, you have to be a materialist. But there are other philosophical options, other worldviews in which these phenomena that we are studying and that interest us so much are possible. Whereas if we pursue Cartesian materialist science, the mere penis, all these phenomena have no place whatsoever. And that is why we must first dismantle this ideology so that at least these phenomena can be possible. And then we'll see how we can study them, how we can understand them, and how we can explain them.
It's perfectly clear. I understand it perfectly that with a purely materialistic view, it has no justification, but separating from that philosophical point of view, it does. Friend Álex, you had a near-death experience. I'm very interested in having a neuroscientist and theoretical physicist tell us about a real near-death experience. Your account is sure to have implications that a person without such profound scientific or physical knowledge could express. For this, I'm infinitely grateful that you share your near-death experience.
It would be a pleasure and an honor to do it here. I have a peculiarity, but it's very simple. I am a theoretical physicist, a neuroscientist who almost died. That's the only thing. And I was in the tunnel, I'll tell you about it now. And when I came back and recovered from the surgery and so on, well, first I tried to integrate that experience into my personal life. There's no other option. What does this mean for me, for my life now, for the future, for my daughters, and my relationship, and so on? But I also decided that I would try to integrate her professionally. And I believe that's the interesting dual perspective we can also discuss today, right? What does this experience tell me, not just as Álex, as a human being, but as someone who has been shaped, sometimes even misshaped, trained, and thoroughly instructed in physics and neuroscience? What does physics tell me, and what does neuroscience tell me about what I've experienced, right? Well, if you want, I'll tell you the story.
Experience, please.
Also, today marks a curious anniversary. 4 years, not since the event, but since I went to the hospital. I went to the hospital for a stomach bleed. And, well, it's your specialty, obviously.
Yes, my specialty, exactly.
I had a bleed in my stomach. So I didn't know where the bleeding was coming from. I went to the emergency room, and for many days, 9 days, easily, the doctors were trying to figure out where it was coming from my entire digestive system, where the bleeding was originating. So I was slowly losing blood. I sometimes tell it like this: if you have a water leak in the bathroom, it's fine if you detect it within half an hour, but if you wait more than a week, that's what happened to me. I lost a lot of blood and kept losing my vitality. I fainted. On the first day I collapsed, they wouldn't let me get out of bed. In the 2 weeks I was hospitalized, I lost 13 kilos. I went through a transformation. When I talk about it, my voice always breaks. Well, I had 3 things happen to me. Do we have time for you to talk about them? One Thursday afternoon when I was alone, they moved me to a different wing of the hospital, to a room where I was alone. My wife was coming and going, poor thing, like crazy with the little ones, and I was completely alone. When I fell asleep, I noticed that my consciousness suddenly turned off and on. It was like this. I'd noticed that as I drifted off, the house's fuses would trip, and then I'd wake up startled because I realized I wasn't just falling asleep, but my mind was slipping away, you know? And scared, I'd call the nurses who would come and say, everything's fine, calm down. That was the first thing. The next thing that happened to me, which I've only told a few times, is that I had sometimes we call it a dream, but I truly believe it's a vision. It is a vision. I had a vision where there was a carnival, there were firefighters, everyone disappeared, and suddenly I found myself in an ancient village with a stone floor, and then giant animals appeared, 5 or 6 meters tall, hybrid animals. Imagine a giraffe with the head of a lion, a tiger with the head of a crocodile, and these animals had fire in their heads, a marvelous fire that would not burn. And they were walking and placing themselves on top of me without stepping on me with their big paws, and they would bend their heads and put them on top of my head, that fire. One by one, these animals passed by, placing their fire upon my head. And then they transformed into colorful flying carpets and flew off towards the mountains. That, funnily enough, I don't usually tell that story because people tell me, well, tell us about the near-death experience, the tunnel, which I'll also tell you about right now. It was very brief. But lately, since I've reflected on this, I believe that this, we call it a dream, I believe this vision was a kind of blessing. I don't know. And I think it has much more meaning than I gave it when it happened to me, right? Because, well, I think it has to do with consciousness. But, well, we can just say I had that dream vision immediately after that episode where I felt like I was fainting, and also before the near-death experience itself. And now the near-death experience, how's that going? Cinematically, it's told in 7 seconds. I'm in a tunnel, which is really a pit. I mean, I'm looking up, and up above, 3 figures are waiting for me. Against the light, I see them. I see their silhouettes. I know each one of them, I have no doubt. The light is yellow and very strong, and I, at that moment, know, and that is very important when I tell this, I don't think or believe that. I know I am certain that they are receiving me, and if I accept their help, I will die. I know it. And at the same time, and I've read this many times, I read it after I had mine, telepathically, the communication is telepathic, we could say. I don't speak with them, I sense and I feel and know what they are proposing and what I am feeling. I give them my thanks and I tell them that not yet. I decide to return, and at that moment, es que I'm calm. No, I'm not in absolute joy, but I'm very calm in that pit. I know what's going to happen, and I simply thank them and return. That is my near-death experience.
The patients I've attended who have had a near-death experience strongly emphasize certain aspects. First, they communicate with the beings they encounter during the near-death experience telepathically, that is, through telepathy. Secondly, they tell me or notify me that upon encountering familiar beings, they perfectly identify during the near-death experience. They communicate with them telepathically. Thirdly, they also tell me that their experiences move through time, but only in the current moment, in the present. That is to say, although some of them tell me they perceive their life as if it were a film, their past, present, and some have even spoken to me about the future. And they perceive everything as happening in the present, in the current moment. Another aspect that I've also been informed about is that they have no real connection to time and space. For example, if they want to be in the antipodes, there are documented cases that speak of the antipodes. Resuscitated patients in the United States spoke of what was happening at that moment in the antipodes. Just by thinking they want to be in the antipodes, they automatically find themselves there. This means there's a transfer of information of possibility independent of space and time. And another aspect they also speak about is the moment of returning. The vast majority of patients that I have experienced do not wish to return. The situation is so pleasant, filled with such well-being, harmony, and love, that they prefer to remain in that state. However, I have encountered others, including a doctor, who voluntarily wished to return. He said he wanted to return, with the precise feeling of what you were recounting. If they cross a certain barrier, a level, or something they become aware of, they cannot return. So they are fully aware and do not accept remaining definitively in the other dimension. So they return voluntarily. You have experienced these aspects, and I would also like to know if you could tell me, did you identify the three people or the three images that you saw? Because they insist that they recognize them perfectly.
Yes.
Did you experience all these aspects?
Not all, some do. For example, I didn't have a life review. We know, right? Those of us in this field know about the Bruce Grayson scale, the Grayson scale.
Correct. Of the 16 items.
Exactly. And you can mark them.
Correct.
Mine, and sometimes I joke, would be a light near-death experience. There are others that are very complete.
Light. You have it whole and part.
Yes. Also, it's important to note that I wasn't in cardiac arrest, which is something people need to understand. I think you don't necessarily have to be clinically dead. These are fascinating cases for scientific study, a whole constellation of them. Even I have encountered cases of pregnant women giving birth who at that moment leave their bodies. I mean, there's a very broad phenomenology, right? Well, going back to the question, yes, there are aspects that I have also experienced and others that I haven't. I also share what you say, and it must be said very clearly, I believe, to everyone. What is experienced there is, it's not just real, it's hyper-real. What's lived is hyperreal. Yes, it's not comparable to a dream. Yes, we call it a dream because, yes, it's another state of consciousness perhaps, and it's one we have at hand. To say, well, if it's not waking, it must be a dream. But that reality is more real than actual reality. For those who haven't experienced it, they'll have to believe it for the moment or place it in a box of skepticism that we can later try to address. Well, to clarify or help people truly understand if they haven't lived it themselves. More things to say. Well, about these figures. I don't usually share who they are, though in private I do say, but we could, to start, they weren't family, which is often thought. They don't have contact with their families. It's quite common.
Very common. Exactly so.
I would call them spiritual guides. They were three spiritual guides, very familiar and very well known to me. I wasn't surprised then, but I was later thinking about it, I said, wow. If that's the welcome for whatever comes next, what a lovely welcome. I hope, as we talked the other night at dinner, that they'll be there when I die, truly, to welcome me. I mean, it was such a beautiful thing to say. Wow. These guides, these avatars, these incredibly special people are here for me. How absolutely wonderful. One more thing I would like to add is that, and I want to thank you for your work and for your message. And it's because enough is enough, and here my activist side comes out, right? Enough of people being called crazy or stupid for having had and shared these experiences. And that's one of the reasons why I'm telling it. Because it seems that if someone deeply involved in science and they've experienced that and I tell the story, I feel you do the same thing on a much larger scale, don't you? To give a voice so that people can have a say. To tell people, if this has happened to you, you're not crazy and you're not stupid. And it's enough that science communicators or anyone else tell people what they can and cannot feel or experience. Enough of that. Especially when it's something so wonderful and so transformative, because that also transforms your life.
I am so incredibly grateful for these words, because coming from you, they carry extraordinary weight. They lend a real substance to to our message, to everything you are saying, helping people truly understand that those who have had this experience are neither crazy, nor are they experiencing hallucinations. There are cases, in world history where people, for repeatedly sharing their near-death experience, have been diagnosed as psychopaths and received psychiatric treatment. Out of fear, people. I believe we can greatly help open this door of understanding for all humanity that this is a phenomenon that is very evident. There are thousands of documented cases, and it is a reality within the human species. There's no need to be afraid. It's normal that this can happen to us.
If you'll permit me, the real novelty, is that science has decided to start studying them. This year marks 50 years since Raymond Moody's book was published.
Correct.
It's like the starting gun for the scientific study of near-death experiences, but they've always existed. All traditions contain them in their teachings, in their stories. The novelty is simply that now science, a part of it, has decided to study them. And it's thanks to, I insist, people like you and many other pioneers like Bruce Grayson, Raymond Moody, Pim van Lommel, etc., who, having that position of authority as doctors, have been humble enough to listen to what their patients had to say. Two things are happening here, two phenomena, briefly. One is there technology to resurrect people? Technology advances and people can be resurrected. Point number one. And second, the doctor is willing to hear the stories. And if you hadn't listened, this wouldn't be happening. So thank you again.
You are very kind to me, Annette. Thank you. Initially, I spoke with neurologists, with psychiatrists, psychologists. Logically, they are doctors and have the Cartesian training as I did. Automatically, they replied to me, "Don't worry. These are hallucinations as a consequence of neuronal suffering due to lack of irrigation." Compadre, we know that neurons are very sensitive to a lack of cerebral blood flow. They are hallucinations. So what I did was examine the characteristics of near-death experiences and the characteristics of a hallucination. I see that they don't match at all. Experience has a logical structure. Hallucination is absurd. Patients remember the experience for life. Hallucinations are forgotten. They want no part of them. A near-death experience causes a significant psychological impact, but a hallucination, none. Do you agree they are two clinically distinct entities with no connection at all?
This is not my specialty, but from what I've read and the professionals I've spoken with, it seemed they are very clear that this is not so easily classifiable as just a hallucination. Here's the problem: we return to materialism. And it's okay, We can look, if we consider it as a hypothesis, it's all good. What do I mean by this? For many years, materialist scientists have told us, we know it's not, we know it's not. And now what's happening is that we've turned these words around, and now we say, we don't know and we want to know more. That's a spectacular change. What's happening? When you're discussing with someone who knows a lot about the brain, but whose ideology is materialistic in that operating system in Windows 95, for those of us who are a little older, right? You can't install the software for something that goes beyond the brain to be happening. For the mind to go beyond the skull, to leave the brain, it is inconceivable. So I think a good starting point is, we don't know if we'll investigate further and be able to do what you mentioned, right? We'll be able to rule out hypotheses. Hallucination, it seems not. So what's left then? And we will keep moving forward, but always from a place of, from a healthy ignorance, from not starting from a dogmatism where the answer is already known, which is what happens many times. And the answer, I insist, for those who believe, because it's their belief that the universe is just matter, and that the mind, as you mentioned at the beginning, consciousness is an epiphenomenon. Well, for these people, when the brain shuts down, the mind shuts down, and that's it. There's nothing more to investigate. Anche por dos que, y eso, estimados, I think the only thing we ask is, well, let's put this on the table and present it as a hypothesis, but there are other hypotheses worth investigating.
I also wanted to mention the following. In experiences of cancer leading to death, I've seen two types of phenomena, some that are objectifiable and others that are transcendent, which logically we cannot, with the usual Cartesian and Newtonian method, evidence or demonstrate. Regarding those that are clearly evident, which we can objectify, I've had, for example, some truly spectacular experiences with patients who, during the clinical death I was reviving them from, told me exactly everything that was happening in the department, for example, in the emergency room, in each of its areas, which I later verified and can certify is true. A patient who knew us, recognized us, then went into clinical death. He identified by name and surname the whole team that was resuscitating her. So I have several proofs. Another current study that neuroradiologists are also carrying out, which involves the practice of functional magnetic resonance imaging on patients who had a near-death experience quite some time ago. So they ask them to express or recount their entire experience with all the details while the magnetic resonance imaging is being performed. It's been observed that when they mention an object that caught their attention, one they'd never seen before or since, only during their near-death experience, and it sparked their interest, meaning it created a memory. They have a memory. When they describe and recount it during an MRI, the occipital lobe activates. The same neurologists who opposed the acceptance of the near-death experience were surprised and told me, this patient has memory of this object, mirror neurons are involved here. And they end by telling me, this patient really saw the object and isn't lying. So I tell them, how can that be if I have him clinically dead and I'm resuscitating him and this object is far away and you assure me? They say, I can only assure you that he really saw the object. So we have an increasing number of objective proofs that allow us to say this is real. It's not an invention, a dream, or a hallucination. Now we move on to the chapter, let's say not controversial, but harder to prove.
Sure.
These are the transcendent phenomena. For example, they tell me they saw a deceased relative. I don't know if he has seen it, if they've seen a light, if they've seen their life. I cannot objectify any of this. So, here comes the problem. If from the point of view of the scientific method it's impossible to demonstrate this, then what I did is I took one more step and entered another discipline. The scientific method studies what is objective, what is macroscopic, but then we enter a microscopic world, which is, of course, theoretical physics, quantum mechanics, and quantum theory. And here I am truly, truly satisfied to have a theoretical physicist, a quantum expert right here by my side. I'm not a theoretical physicist, I'm an amateur. I've read things, I've taken a course, but naturally my knowledge is rudimentary. And perhaps I've said something at some point that might actually be debatable. I accept that, and I'm always willing, I repeat, to change it if an expert demonstrates it to me. So I wanted to ask you, when entering the world of quantum physics, the first thing that truly strikes me, that truly grabs my attention, is that the structural concept of the universe changes completely. Macroscopically, we've called it a materialist ontology, but when we enter the quantum, we must speak of a structural element, energy. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It transforms, potential, kinetic, thermal, electromagnetic, whatever you want. And thirdly, it's in a constant state of vibration, waves and electromagnetic waves propagate. As an expert, would you agree to add anything else regarding the structural concept?
We go from macroscopic objectifiable matter to a world we can no longer objectify. We're going to study some particles, atoms, that we don't see. We'll study their effects, their interactions, and express them with mathematical formulas. Mathematics is the language of theoretical physics. Are you in total agreement with these aspects I've read and been told about, which, I repeat, I'm no expert in?
Let's get to it. Let's get to it. But first, I love this rhythm. If you don't mind, can we take a small step back? Because I want to say a couple of things about
You have free reign.
near-death experiences,
I want to get your best.
benchmarks, and we'll get into quantum. I'm not a quantum physics expert. I'm a theoretical physicist. My doctorate's in theoretical physics. I had a great professor of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, high energy physics at the University of Barcelona, José Ignacio Latorre, a true master. And we'll talk about quantum in a moment. But first, you said something very important that I want to highlight before we try to find an explanation, which I understand is where you
Go.
You seek quantum to find a
Something to explain these profound things.
But before that, you said something very important, because you talked about how do we objectify? How do we study these experiences? And I want to remind you that, and you also said it's a problem. For scientists, a problem is a good thing. For people in our daily lives, a problem isn't good, but a problem is a gift, because the problem is what will make you go into the unknown. In other words, it's good news when things don't add up, because it means that when you solve why they don't, we'll learn a lot. This is the first thing to say. And the second is, and now to quantum, as I was telling you, Galileo made this, sometimes we can call it, I call it the fos de fos. And he said, the human soul for religion, and the movement of the stars and things in the terrestrial world for science.
For science.
So this separation of domains has worked very well for many centuries. And this screen, which I sometimes describe as a screen of success, science as an enterprise, right? A formidable business project that has conquered the physical, chemical, and biological, though life's secret isn't so hard to decipher. Psychology comes along, doesn't it? A little over 100 years ago, psychology decides it's going to study the psyche logos, that's the word, the soul.
The mind, the soul.
The mind, and with this soul, consciousness, we often use these interchangeably, but as the saying goes, we'll just accept it for now. Let's just call them all the same for now. And when psychology decides to study the soul, the mind, it backs away and says, ugh, how do I measure this? How do I mathematize this? It won't allow it. The human soul won't. It won't allow itself to be measured and mathematized. And so this is my interpretation, and the psychologists I know agree with me. They look to Sumo Sol's cousin. Those of us who are old enough will remember the ad for Sumo Sol's cousin. He looks at Sumo Sol's cousin and asks, who is Sumo Sol's cousin? The theoretical physicist, right? Or the physicist. And what does she say? Measure and to mathematize. So psychology that wanted to study this reverses its stance, even denies its existence. It says the soul doesn't exist. And for many years, 20th century psychology was behaviorist. It studies behavior. Why? Because in behavior is what can be measured and mathematized. No, I tell you this because, of course, I know it's only in the 90s of the last century, 30 years ago, which in science is nothing. A Nobel laureate, Francis Crick,
Crick, yes.
and it grants the papal blessing to the scientific study of consciousness within orthodox laboratories. Therefore, we must consider the context. We have only been studying consciousness in a scientific manner for 30 years. And consciousness, I repeat, is that very thing which Galileo set aside for later and we simply forgot. What do I want to tell you with this? That we don't know how it's done. I'm trying to explore a science 2.0. So why am I taking this detour? To get back to near-death experiences. Of course, the temptation, which is very understandable and we should pursue, is, well, let's put them in a brain scanner. Let's see what happens inside the brain. But the other element that can't be forgotten is the human experience at all times. I mean, a story a patient tells you, they might call it an anecdote. And in fact, many times it's called, well, it's just an anecdote. They tell you. But 2 stories, 10, 100, 500, 1,000, 1,000 stories told by patients who don't know each other to people who are very well trained like you and other professionals, those are already scientific data. So it's very important that we don't forget. All this is to tell you that sometimes I'm a bit elliptical, and I insist that if we want to make a science of consciousness, human experience is our working material. It is our scientific data too. Not just what brain receptor, what brain circuit, what resonance. Remember how I mentioned the first and second class before, right? The reality that travels in first class and the reality that travels in second class, which is the one of experiences. Now, all of them need to travel in first class. Therefore, the job is to unite the experiences with the measures that can be taken.
I see it clearly and I thank you. I love it.
Before we jump into the explanation, so for now, the data we work with is what our brain scanners can measure and what people tell us. And that's sacred. It's sacred to listen to it and sacred to consider it, treating it as scientific data too, because it's the experience we want to understand. All right, now let's move to quantum.
What I told you at first, the structural element, do you agree we should discuss energy, particles, atoms, subatomic particles, and these properties of vibrational states, electromagnetic waves, etc.? This as a basic principle, that is, we must change our paradigm. From what is matter, we transition to something we cannot perceive. We have to study its effects, its interactions, and then express it using mathematical formulas. This is our starting point, so to speak.
It's a starting point, radical, disruptive. It happened 100 years ago, and we're still figuring out what this means. Paradigms rarely change, but when they do, it's a huge experience. Think about it. Almost at a civilizational level, quantum physics arrived 100 years ago, 100 plus years, right? And we're still processing what this change in our worldview truly means. That's why quantum physics is so wonderful and so mysterious. How can we possibly explain it? How can I explain what's happening in what was happening there? Let's start with an analogy. The materialists, whom I sometimes call material wits because they're so clever, would say everything is made of matter and there's nothing else. And everything else we talk about has to emerge from, right? We've seen this is very problematic for studying consciousness. You know, but they even believed everything was made of matter. Let's think of this as liquid water. My apologies. I meant solid water. Solid. But then we realized that matter transforms into energy and energy into matter, which is an incredible breakthrough, isn't it? When we grasp this in physics, right? Ori 105, Dali 1 kas. So, solid water can be made liquid, but we can go beyond energy. Many powerful theoretical physicists now say the universe is made not of matter or energy, but of information. So, let's think of it as gaseous water. So suddenly there are several states. There is matter, no doubt. There is energy, no doubt. And there is information. I think there are more things. So one of the first changes, and many changes happen at the beginning of the 20th century, is that we have to redefine not only the rules of the world, but what it's made of. And so, with relativity, it turns out that space, literally the Cartesian squared, absolute space, will now deform according to the mass that is present, because mass and space are practically siblings in their very definition. It will turn out that time will run slower if we move faster, meaning the clock, also Cartesian, now it's going to expand. I mean, we have changed this definition of space, that of time, that of matter converts into energy, even information. What do we have left? Notice the change, we haven't talked about quantum yet, but the change in definition of what we took for granted is radical. And this is very important to remember, because we will also have to change our definition of death and our definition of consciousness. And that's perfectly fine. Now, what about quantum mechanics? I remember how they used to teach it to me at the university. These physicists start finding anomalies, which is the same thing that's happening to us in the sense that we have this data that don't fit into any framework. Near-death experiences, other margins of consciousness. In their case, it was something very curious. I don't want to elaborate too much, but well, you tell me, cut me off or redirect me, because this is fascinating.
At the conclusion of the 19th century, Lord Kelvin, a truly eminent physicist, proclaimed that every single problem had been entirely resolved.
With that beautiful arrogance that we physicists possess, he said, there are no more problems left, just 2 anomalies remain. Perhaps some doctoral student, maybe in jest, can finish studying them and physics is already complete. And one of those phenomena was black body radiation, an emission of energy in the form of electromagnetic waves that simply could not be comprehended. It just didn't fit within the established framework. Well, then, by delving into that anomaly, Planck and many other well-known geniuses emerged. And from that, quantum physics was born. So once again, after all this introduction, quantum physics begins to encounter phenomena that appear impossible to describe using the classical perspective. And we can start talking about them, right? Superposition, entanglement, an uncertainty to the extent that it doesn't seem to be just a matter of improving your device. It seems there's something intrinsic and many very strange phenomena.
An energy collapse.
The tunnel effect, the collapse of the wave function. So quantum physicists need to build themselves another world, another mathematical world and another conceptual world to be able to accommodate those phenomena. And, well, we can talk about some of them. It still remains, over 100 years later, quite mysterious. Even though there are equations and technology, it's not an unattainable mystery. I mean, it has many applications, but even today, there are several interpretations and possibilities to understand what that happening means. Look, one more thing I'll add, if you don't mind. The problem is that, and I remember this from my professor at the university, quantum physics realizes that thinking of a space where objects are localized there and one has access to them and can describe them, the description of a physical state can no longer be done in a classical way. And then one can only wonder about certain things in those states, but it seems one can never truly cross over and see everything that's happening. And so, by describing these states in this mathematical way, which is very complex, all sorts of impossible miracles begin to happen that give rise to this strangeness, right? To these very strange phenomena that are quantum phenomena, but they happen and occur in the world of energies, in the microscopic world of very small energy.
All these fundamental principles of quantum physics brought forth by Nobel laureates, the superposition of states established by Louis de Broglie, the collapse of energy proposed by Bohr, the principle of uncertainty by Heisenberg, then the quantum entanglement by Einstein, Rosen, Podolsky, Bohm, Bell, all of them, and then time. The appreciation of time, as you have mentioned, Einstein and Stephen Hawking. It's not the classic linear progression of past, present, and future, as it is in a Cartesian method, but rather it's an illusion, as Einstein says, and this changes everything. These principles, quite evidently, are mathematically sound, though they are very difficult to comprehend. And, as you have mentioned, even Nobel Prize winners hold diverse opinions regarding their interpretation, especially concerning quantum entanglement and the collapse of energy. These are subjects. It's the quantum enigma. Now I ask you this. Is this truly real? Can we really transfer this concept to the living cell, to a living being? That is to say, can we actually apply quantum mechanics within the field of biology? It's true that Einstein himself subtly hinted at this idea. And Schrödinger, in his famous work, What is Life?, also strongly insisted on this very important aspect.
Jordan, in 1944, Method introduces quantum biology, linking chemistry, biology, and quantum physics. Later, Roger Penrose and Hameroff, with their OR, orchestrated objective reduction involving microtubules, now propose that consciousness has a classical relationship with a quantum transfer channel within the microtubules.
And finally, in the decade of the 2010s in Berkeley,
they clearly demonstrate that photosynthesis, a fundamental phenomenon for life on our planet, the process of converting inorganic to organic matter, involves a quantum entanglement phenomenon in the capture of solar energy and CO2 to facilitate this transformation from inorganic to organic while releasing oxygen. Subsequently, it has now been demonstrated in ferritin, in olfaction, in genetic mutations, in the robin, for example, the movements of the birds and of the animals. What this means is that there are biological phenomena which possess a very clear underlying basis, and these are fundamentally rooted in quantum aspects, suggesting that quantum entanglement plays a significant role. The tunnel effect, due to these great distances of subatomic particles, which allow the passage of energy waves, of Parr waves through different energetic gradients, as if a tunnel existed.
The collapse of energy, quantum coherence. All these phenomena seem to be involved in biology. I know it's an incipient stage. We're just starting. We must be very cautious, but can we already speak of quantum biology today?
Yes, I think there's no doubt. Another thing is how far we'll be able to extend these microscopic quantum phenomena to the macroscopic world, which I think that's what we are trying to correct. That's why we're talking about quantum physics. But the answer is yes. I mean, there's no doubt that biological processes involve and show them, and without these quantum processes, certain reactions wouldn't occur, right? Then, for example, it's known in bird navigation that they use properties of light.
Migratory objects, that has been demonstrated.
Yes. So no, there's no real problem in saying or invoking that some quantum phenomena survive, and this is the key. That's what's called decoherence. You can prepare a quantum system, but you must prepare it with great care and precision. It's very difficult to do experimentally. And when you want to take it to the macroscopic world, normally we could say that it breaks down. Another metaphor is like trying to hold water, but it slips through your fingers. And the quantum phenomenon, the magic of quantum, you could say, in our macroscopic world, where energies are vast compared to the tiny, it's very hard to observe this phenomena, right? I think you're asking me about this, and we're discussing it because when we try to understand certain phenomena of consciousness or the mind, it's very tempting to say, well, the Sumusol cousin, the problem solver, remember, right?
I haven't said anything yet.
No.
I can stop, right?
No, but
For now, I'm asking if we can fundamental aspects of quantum theory. If we can apply this quantum theory to biology, but I haven't said anything yet about its connection to the series.
well, but coming from there, but anyway, I feel.
We will make it.
Are we going to make it? All right. Okay, well, let's slow down a bit.
No problem. Talking about quantum biology is fine. It's a field of study.
There are very serious people doing it. Another thing is that what we think. I say this perhaps more from my own research field. I study phenomena, for instance, concerning how two minds can be connected remotely, or if they can. So it's very tempting for me and for the field. I've seen it done, and it's sometimes done in what's called New Age, right?
Running off to quantum. Why? Most because physics is the strongest discipline, and within physics there are many wonderful fields. Fluid physics, thermodynamics, relativity, all fascinating, but there's one that's like the odd bird, right? It's quantum. Of course, since quantum physics gives you these impossible things that happen, it's very tempting to go look for them and say, well, now with this, I'm going to try to explain the connection between minds. But there are people who do it very well. I mean, you were talking about Penrose and Hameroff, and they have physical, biological theories that try to explain consciousness. For example, there's Dean Radin and Stuart Combs, who also have a quantum physical interpretation or approach that they are trying to apply to the study of the mind, right? There's Federico Fachin, one of the inventors of the microprocessor, who recently has been completely dedicated to understanding consciousness from a non-materialistic perspective, and also seeks elements in quantum physics to build those theories that we currently don't have. So all of that is legitimate. The thing is, we must be very careful not to confuse an analogy that this happens here and it also happens there by saying, well, just as it's found in quantum mechanics, this is constantly happening in our lives or in our minds. I believe that with that note of prudence, we can do what is done when you study the unknown. Take the best tools you have to try to explain the phenomenon.
You've also spoken of the possibility of transferring all these quantum phenomena or quantum principles to classical physics, the macroscopic. I want to ask you something which we discussed, but for me, I think it's important. For me, from my point of view, my very humble point of view, it's the Schrödinger wave function equation. By making certain approximations, one can reach a situation very close to Newton's second law, which states that if we're talking about classical physics, force equals mass times acceleration. This is important to me because it breaks down that chasm that Descartes established, saying science or matter is one thing and spirit is another. Let's separate what has nothing to do with each other.
This, if it is genuinely and truly accurate, it means that we can move from the intricate micro world of quantum mechanics, and then we are able to explain many things within the macroscopic world. In other words, this significant conceptual abyss simply does not exist. Don't these two different worldviews actually complement each other in a posistum, no? Each with its own particularities, evidently, but deep down we're truly talking about the very same thing. It's our world. One views it macroscopically, what can be observed in the human dimension, which has its limits, as we depend on our sensitive and sensory organs, and another that does so in the microscopic world of the atom, subatomic particles, energy, and so on, that we don't see. Always effects, interactions, and mathematics. Are you in agreement with this possibility of the quantum and classical realms approaching, and that to a certain extent shows that the two worlds complement each other? I ask.
Yes and no, yes and no. Because something very important in physics is to understand that everything in physics, in fact everything, including quantum, we also need to demystify quantum for one reason. It is not the final theory. It doesn't quite align with relativity. It is incompatible in some crucial aspect. And those who are trying to stitch them together or unify them know that when they find the solution, another theory will come along that encompasses them, one that will go beyond quantum mechanics. And as simple as, so at some point, we'll even have to thank quantum physics, just as we thanked Newtonian physics, and move on to another theory. It sometimes seems that when we talk about quantum, it's like the final frontier of a video game. No. Quantum mechanics is one of the most precise theories or frameworks, perhaps the most accurate we have to understand physical reality, but it's not the definitive one. We must not forget this. However, another thing that I learned in physics is that every master has their own method. What does that mean? It means that when you're studying fluid physics, something so apparently so simple and, well, wonderful, like how water flows, right?
Yes.
It's very hard to study. Yes, you have your equations, Navier-Stokes, whatever they are, your own little book. And there, quantum physics has little to say. In fact, it has nothing to say. And that theory is an effective theory. It serves me for this phenomenon, at this scale, in these conditions. It's like a passport. But now, if you want to study phenomena, for example, that have to do with giant masses, right? Then you go to relativity, not to fluid dynamics. And there you have equations, Einstein's equations from relativity, where those are your rules of the game. Now you're no longer playing checkers, you're playing chess. And you have those rules of the game. And then the same thing happens with quantum mechanics, and the same thing happens with thermodynamics. So regarding the question you were about to ask, this transfer,
That's exactly right, a transfer.
From one part of relativity, I'm sorry, of reality to another, it's not trivial at all. Many times it's very difficult to see how I connect these rooms of the house with a door that allows me to pass. You know, almost like in Alice in Wonderland, which I'm now reading to my daughters. You don't fit through the door, you might have to shrink to get through the door's tiny opening. It's a long way of saying yes and no. We know there are theories, and that's why we appreciate those theories that unify and encompass other specific instances. Therefore, classical physics is not something we simply discard. We continue to make use of it. It represents a particular instance of a much broader perspective that, among other things, has been provided by relativity and quantum mechanics. And the objective is, you see, physicists don't try to reduce. It's a very biologist's view. I have worked with biologists for many years, you know. Biologists and psychologists are more materialistic reductionist. Physicists always seek theories of everything, theories that encompass more and more. So we must know where each theory stands, seek connections, if any, but the goal isn't to link them, but to find one that can encompass more phenomena. And another thing you said, perhaps as a correction, or rather a complementary comment, that you can go from classical to quantum, a priori, tells us nothing about mind or consciousness.
No, nothing.
In fact, as a physicist, I sometimes say things my colleagues might not like. Theories of everything explain everything except what matters to us. Back to Galileo, you can have a theory of everything. Imagine we have classical, quantum, relativity, everything solved. What all makes perfect sense. That will be truly great news for the physics community. And does this tell us anything about near-death experiences, about consciousness? In fact, it tells us little. We can use it, try to make it relevant to us. So once again, this is a long way of saying, let's go to quantum to find what we need, but we don't have to go there for it, because what we need is also within human experience, mind, consciousness, and there physics has very little or nothing to say for now.
Well, we've delved a bit into the quantum aspects with your wonderful experience and knowledge. But now I ask you, this patient with near-death experiences that they described to me, we've talked about the phenomena, let's say transcendent, which we cannot objectify, but there are some that we can objectify. For me, for example, it tells me what we've said in this transfer of information, independent of space and time. In a logical way, I have to think that something, if I have my body here, and it's telling me with all kinds of details, something that is happening at a distance, and that this is true, as a functional magnetic resonance objectively demonstrates to me, it means that something has been capable to leave this body, to go to whatever distance, regardless of how far that may be, as we have discussed, and objectively capture all the details down to the very smallest one. And this affects memory, punto, because he can explain it to you later. First point. Second point. These patients tell me, with complete ease, they pass through solid structures. We have that famous movie Ghost, which everyone has seen, and graphically, that's what the patients describe. They pass through walls, they pass through the subway, they enter and exit just like in the film. It's a graphic way to put it. They tell you exactly the same thing. A patient, one who knew me, told me that since she knew me and didn't understand what was happening to her, she came up to me and touched me. And his surprise was immense, because when he tried to touch me, he passed right through me. I didn't feel anything at all. So we've been discussing the fact that energy is the fundamental structural element. Energy is information. We are also in agreement with this. It is information. So, doesn't all this suggest to you, logically speaking, that besides the physical body, which is clinically dead, objectively, with evidence, something persists during this interval of time, proven to be so, something capable of leaving what is called non-local consciousness, spirit or superconsciousness? Something emerges, it can move. It objectively captures some data which it later remembers. And not only that, but they can gather information about people they encountered during their near-death experience, information they never knew. And they discovered phenomena that astonished both them and their family members, things that had never been communicated to them. What I mean is, there are certain facts that clearly demonstrate there's something enabling this transfer of information. And so, I ask you what I said. By the scientific method, this is completely inexplicable. So I ask, don't we see a certain parallelism, or an analogy, or a similarity? I don't know what, with phenomena like, for example, the tunnel effect or the quantum entanglement effect. I'm not saying it's the same, but I have nothing else to compare it to. But I do see a certain parallelism, a resemblance. So I ask, and you as an expert, should we completely rule out the idea, say, that this has nothing to do with these quantum phenomena? Or truly, if we accept that everything is energy, then energy is neither created nor destroyed. The body is dead, but there is an energy that persists, and there are these phenomena with parallelism. It lends itself a bit to saying, perhaps there is some relation. This has perhaps been one of the things I've done, that without sufficient knowledge, perhaps, I have at some point said, I see. I'm not saying it's true, but I see a parallel, because nothing else explains it. Is this going too far? Is there no basis to say this? Or how can we face this situation?
It's like walking a tightrope. And I had to find that middle ground. Because on the one hand, you could fall to one side, and that's falling on the side where you deny it and say, this has nothing to do with it. I believe that's going too fast. denying the possible connection. And as I mentioned to you a moment ago, there are very serious researchers who are working to unite these microscopic phenomena in biology and even in the study of the mind. But we can also fall into the error of very quickly saying it's quantum mechanics that explains it. If one says it's quantum mechanics that explains it, I believe that's also an error, or at least it's premature to say so. And as I told you earlier, it's very tempting to look to quantum and say, since this happens in quantum, this must be what's happening. Let's not rush. For now, we've changed. So we know it's not to we don't know. And now we have this data, which also requires clarifying the difference between if this data or these evidences prove or demonstrate. This is very subtle. Perhaps we could try to unpack it a little bit here, if you'll allow me. Now, when it is said that something has happened, you have all these experiences with your patients who tell you things that are quite incredible. Those are pieces of evidence. But that doesn't prove anything yet. You have to keep accumulating evidence. I believe that just like in front of a court, you have to present your evidence. Sometimes when it's said there's evidence, people, it happened to me recently, get very nervous and say, no, this isn't evidence, as if one piece of evidence were irrefutable proof. No. You accumulate a body of evidence, and then you use theoretical frameworks to try to interpret and explain what's happening. Quantum physics is like this katana. It's a very sharp weapon, and it's very dangerous when we start. Dangerous, I don't like that word either. And I'll take that back, because I also get nervous when people say, no, how dangerous is it? No, it's not dangerous, it's delicate. It's delicate because if we now give quantum physics all the power to explain what we didn't yet know, we then run the risk of having to correct things we still didn't know. So I'm telling you the same thing I told you a few minutes ago. It's perfectly legitimate to use quantum physics as an analogy, as inspiration. There's a quantum physicist, I don't recall who it was, who spoke of another metaphor, that of the traffic light. He says, for many centuries, the traffic light has been read for example, non-locality, which is such an incredible thing, isn't it? Yes, the madness that two particles, and this is known, we could say for a fact, they know about each other at a distance without needing to send a WhatsApp, which is entanglement. How is that explained? We can discuss it. Well, non-locality was unthinkable, impossible in physics until physics arrived. Quantum. Now, with the Nobel awarded recently, just a few years ago, for entanglement, now that we know this occurs, the signal is amber or even green, so that in other fields like biology and psychology, we can begin to conceive this phenomena without being immediately told it's impossible. So I would simply approach it with that caution, not overshooting or underdoing it.
There's an analogy, but we don't truly know if it's actually this. No? Exactly. We can't categorically affirm it.
We can't say quantum physics proves that, no? And then just fill in all these phenomena, but maybe in 10 or 50 years we can do it, or maybe we realize quantum physics wasn't needed, or maybe physicists find a deeper theory, and that's what we use. We don't know yet.
Why, for example, Penrose, who in 2020 was awarded the Nobel Prize, especially for his work on black holes, in his acceptance speech said a phrase that impressed me, perhaps because it interested me or because it has a certain relation to my message. He said, for theoretical physics, for quantum mechanics to advance, we must study consciousness in depth. This was said by Penrose, a Nobel laureate. In other words, we once again arrive at what Wright, another Nobel Prize winner, and von Neumann, the great mathematician, said, that when we delve into mechanics, into quantum physics, the concept of consciousness always emerges in the end. That is to say, we see what you were saying earlier, that they are two different things, but we can't talk about one without the other coming up.
Yes. Immediately the thought comes to our attention.
Right, exactly.
And also, look, something we haven't mentioned. Of course, when quantum physicists realized that the measurement process, we haven't talked about measurement, which is very difficult to explain. But it seems that when you go to measure the properties of the system, all these quantum rules come into play, then these phenomena emerge that you can't understand a priori, right? Because they are superimposed, or there's uncertainty you can't quite clear up, etc. It's almost inevitable to say, wow, but if the measurement has to do with my consciousness interacting with those physical systems. And that's why great geniuses, including Nobel laureates, have seen a possible path there to study very seriously indeed. And that is why they speak, for instance, of the collapse, right? We haven't yet discussed the collapse of the wave function. There are physicists who argue that perhaps the collapse doesn't even exist. But anyway, the collapse, to explain it to you very quickly, let me see if I can explain this properly. The Schrödinger equation is what describes how a system, a quantum system, evolves, you know?
The quantum wave function.
And it is deterministic. Everything is almost, if you know where it is located now and some other conditions, you are able to predict exactly where it will be next. But then there is a very special moment that occurs, which in quantum physics is designated as non-unitary. Unitary means that you are able to know precisely where it is going. And that is when you perform the measurement, when you go and ask nature directly, hey there, system, how are you doing? At that very moment, it's as if there's a suspension of the law, there's a state of martial law for a very brief, tiny instant where the Schrödinger equation pauses for a moment and the result is then returned to your question. When the researcher asks and measures, you can access the thing, what the system lets you access. And at that moment, it's said that the wave function, traveling calmly through its Schrödinger equation, collapses.
Collapse.
And since this has to do with the measurement, it seems that the intervention of the observer's mind, well, it's inevitable to conclude. So then here we have a key where we'll be able to understand consciousness with quantum mechanics through collapse, right?
Power collapse.
That's a very juicy possibility, right? And what you said comes about.
So succulent, right?
It's delicious, of course. Why wouldn't we try that? Why wouldn't we try it? And what's more, since physics is stuck, physics has triumphed, but it's been stalled for decades, I'd say, with string theory, which I'm not an expert in either, but I would say it's in a dead end, right? It's theoretical today because it's not quite visible, and at the same time, we have this other mystery, this other great problem in a good sense, that of the mind, consciousness. Well, sometimes it's, what if these two worlds, as in another analogy we discussed the other day, what if I sail east in a ship and you sail west and we meet us the other side, right? So I also feel it this way as a physicist, and this has been said by very strong, powerful physicists. What theoretical physics lacks might be what the study of consciousness has. And what consciousness lacks might be what theoretical physics can offer it.
I suppose this is the meaning that Penrose, or Roger Penrose, gave to this phrase.
And one more thing, let's remember that physics equations say nothing of pain or love, do they? Therefore, it's totally incomplete in human terms. So we must go that way. I believe there's no other option.
Apart from near-death experiences, which evidently are one of the most accessible transcendent phenomena for research.
Yes.
There are other transcendent phenomena which I personally say I have no experience with most of them, but we can mention them because they form, methodologically, they are part of this group. We're talking about telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, mystical experiences, psychokinesis, and then the experiences of the dying. At the moment of transition, I certainly have experience with this because I have witnessed many deaths among patients, and intensive care staff have a great deal of experience. It's very common. This transcendent phenomenon also manifests itself, but in a different way. See too that I repeat, it's more difficult to demonstrate and find objective phenomena such as near-death experiences offer us, which gives us greater certainty in the phenomenon. It's harder to have it here. But there are studies, increasingly groups are intensely studying this phenomenon, reviewing it. The world's biography, and I think these are a series of phenomena. We can't just say these are hallucinations. They're nonsense and not worth our time. I believe it deserves our respect today. It's another manifestation of our superconsciousness, or perhaps our consciousness itself, which can manifest not only in near-death experiences, but also in other transcendent areas. I reiterate that the ongoing studies truly deserve all our respect, even though I don't have any specific experience in this field. Do you agree with this particular aspect?
Yes, and I appreciate you mentioning them. I'm very grateful you brought them up because, and my activist side is showing again, I need to control my rauxa, as we say in Catalan. Enough already. I mean, just as ordinary people like us, have been called fools or mad, we scientists who wanted to investigate these topics have been called pseudoscientists.
That's right. That's right.
Stop this nonsense right now.
You pseudoscientists.
And all of these perverse prefixes have been put into use to stop it.
The exploration of the unknown, because it has been labeled paranormal, pseudoscientific, supernatural. That's enough. When I underwent my near-death experience, I began to become interested, but no longer just an intellectual interest, and this is what truly changed within me, which I haven't shared with you. So, what truly changed in me? It didn't just intellectually interest me, making me keep on researching science and reading philosophy. This truly touched my heart.
It is true.
And it even reached my stomach, you know? These questions were no longer merely interesting. They became both important and urgent. And so when I went to explore what the scientific disciplines have to say about all this, to see what's available, you know?
Yes.
I found a powerful, serious, rigorous scientific community that has spent 50, 60, even 100 years in some areas researching this very well. And for me, it was a great surprise. I'm not alone. First, I'm not alone. And people, no need to reinvent the wheel in many cases. People have already studied it. I've been lucky to meet them. I've met, they're very senior people like you.
Yes.
I really love it. I have many octogenarian friends. They're almost like mentors, and they've been studying this very well for 50 years, you know? So we need to tell people once again, don't necessarily believe what the white coat expert tells you, saying, oh, this is just nonsense. That's not true. There are scientific journals, scientific conferences, well-done statistics, methodology, cutting-edge technology that is addressing these questions. What do these questions have in common? I'll explain it this way, speaking of it like a piece of Velcro, that the mind detaches from matter for a few moments or for a very long time. This, for Windows 95, for the materialist, is absolutely impossible. So he will fight to the death to prevent that from Flori. You
alter the paradigm.
In fact, there's something that could be put on a t-shirt regarding near-death experiences. If consciousness survives, materialism dies.
Totally.
I mean, his ideology is in mortal danger, right? So that's why there's so much reaction. Yeah? And then we're going to look for ways, and sometimes I'm not very politically correct about this, to tell them there's a place for you too. Because in the end, matter is still a great mystery. Now, returning to what you were saying, before we speak of the mind over matter option, which is a much more elegant way to speak of psychokinesis, for instance, or before we speak of telepathy, the word for which is quite beautiful, telepathos, to feel or to suffer at a distance the pain or the passion of another. Before that, maybe we can discuss what I call the pentagon of the problem of the continuity of consciousness. NDEs are a tiny point, it's a vertex of that pentagon. What do I mean by this? That what's at stake here isn't so much what happened during your NDE. What's at stake is, first, if consciousness exists. Anyone who says it doesn't is a zombie, even if philosophers deny it. They keep denying it, right? There are philosophers who keep denying it. That consciousness exists, yes. What can be studied scientifically, we're trying to do. And if it continues, if something about consciousness, we don't really know what it is sometimes, right? I don't know if it's the soul, the mind, the personality. If there's something that survives, that continues after the physical body is dead, right? And NDEs are a key point for that. But then there are other phenomena we sometimes discuss less because they're still stigmatized, which also provide evidence. All signs point to the same conclusion. This is the pentagon I use when discussing the issue of survival. Then there are other phenomena that are more democratic, and I like to tell it like this. Meaning you don't have to die or almost die or actually die to have an experience of this kind. There are mystical experiences, there are psychedelic experiences, there are experiences of synchronicities in your daily life, there are premonitory dreams, there is a vast array of anomalies that when you place them on a map, you realize they don't prove, but they suggest that the mind goes beyond matter. And this is what now for me, okay, as a human, but as a physicist, neuroscientist, dad and husband, interests me most. This possibility suddenly gains more and more strength.
Don't you think that fundamentally everything depends on the concept we have of the brain? Is it permissive or is it productive? The brain, in other words, is an interface, like a television set that receives information from our true identity, which has continuity outside. And what it does is like a TV set that receives information and transforms these electromagnetic waves into image and sound, or an interface that connects two devices. Is the brain simply this, or is it the one that creates everything entirely? I believe that the fundamental starting point for me is right here. It's either permissive or it is productive. So what we are doing, those of us who are interested in this topic and who research this topic, with the great limitations that we have and the great constraints, we notice pressures from all sides. I come to the conclusion, first of all, what I was telling you, that science for me is the knowledge of the scientist's ignorance. We know very little. We still have much to learn to truly understand all these phenomena that we are studying. We see little dots and things, and logically, since we don't possess sufficient knowledge, we might sometimes lean on analogies, on concepts lacking a genuine scientific foundation. I agree with you. But we possess this investigative drive, this urge to understand etiopathogenesis, what truly causes it, and pathophysiology, how the intricate mechanism actually functions. And we won't stop here until we find it. And until we have it, we just go from one place to another. But I always end up in this final situation. I don't know what you think.
Either the brain is permissive or it is productive.
Let's talk about the PP.
Pepe.
I tell it that way too. I know that, and it's good advice not to talk about politics, nor about religion, nor about soccer.
Exactly.
Right?
We don't talk.
But let's talk about the PP. Let's talk about the PP. The brain is a productive organ or permissive.
Exactly.
This I realized when I read William James, who has a wonderful essay.
What great psychology says.
Great American scholar.
Very American.
He was also interested in some of these phenomena. He would go to see mediums
Yes, very much so. Yes, yes.
He studied them with great care and attention, these scientists. Amazing. But back to, he has an essay called On Human Immortality, and almost like homework, you know? Let's give our listeners some homework. Go online to and find and read it. It's very well written. It's not a scientific article like modern ones, which only specialists grasp. It's lovely. And it covers a topic, as I joke, that everyone cares about. It talks about human immortality, right? And in the beautiful essay, he says something very important. And thanks for bringing the PP here in this discussion, which is, there's no doubt, and sometimes I don't understand how, well, yes, I understand it because it has happened to me. I don't understand how my neuroscientist colleagues, 99.9% of them, can't realize that there are two P's on the table, not just one. There is no doubt that if I do something to my brain, I manipulate it in some way. Or I disturb it. I get a blow to my head or drink too much alcohol, take a substance, anesthesia, and so forth. Now, no doubt that changes my mental state. Usually, there's a correlation, a very strong bond between what happens to one and the other. And James says this in his essay, Over a Century Old, a pioneering and visionary work. He says they already knew that. Well, James doesn't say it, but the Egyptians knew it. By the way, there's an Egyptian papyrus that recounts perhaps the oldest document where it's told that someone's brain was pierced.
Edwin. His name is Edwin.
Yes, and he had difficulty walking. Hey, that's what science is all about. Bravo, very good. We are discovering a clear correlation. If this changed, then the other thing changes. Excellent. Neuroscience, which has also triumphed, just like physics, and has gone incredibly far with all its tools. Ultimately, what it shows or proves is a correlation between brain states and mental states. And that happens in perception, in memory, in many things. But now comes William James's key insight. The important thing is not to know that the mind is a function of the brain. We already know that. It's what is the nature of that function. And here we have two options. And this is like a thriller for me. When I give presentations and talks, I tell people, remember two key ideas, Galileo's, who paused, and the other is William James's, the PP. If the brain is a productive organ, if its function, the very nature of its function, is to produce. Produce what? Everything. Our thoughts, our perceptions, our consciousness, the mind itself.
This is the issue.
Well, this is the problem.
Here is the solution.
If it's productive, then all right. When the brain gets damaged and then it dies,
It all ends.
Cognition, the mind, consciousness decays and dies, it's over. But what if the brain had another function, a permissive one? And then here we can use other metaphors. What if it's a filter that receives the mind? And here we're speaking in a metaphorical sense, but well, the productivists and materialists, as I call them, also often use metaphors to explain things, right? They're talking about the computer. What if it's a filter that takes the mind and decides what gets through and what doesn't? And that makes a lot of evolutionary sense. We might not have time to discuss this, but I often bring it up here. If these skills exist, I can't always be okay. Seeing my deceased loved ones, having telepathy, my dinner would burn. I'd have a car accident. I mean, evolutionarily, it also makes a lot of sense that the brain has isolated the mind from perceiving everything all the time. So what's key here? And when I realized that was, for me, a crucial moment in this integration process. Look, every time I talk about my integrating my near-death experience, William James gives me a crucial key, that if the brain is permissive, all we're discussing is possible. So now we must take that model to look at the evidence. And maybe in the end, we can even refute the first one or even have both coexist. What if the brain is productive of certain activities like the ego, thoughts, and so on, but permissive of others that have to do with the most transcendental, with the mystical? What if both coexist? And that would be very good news scientifically, and I think also for society. And that we tell them, hey, look, and our research seems to indicate that, indeed, the mind is porous, that you can be connected to everything. And that's why non-locality, and the está, and that's why we'd go back to quantum, but it's not needed. Let's rewind, okay? So, well, when you talk about this, I get really excited because this other P changes everything. That there's another option changes everything.
It's fundamental. PP, the PP is fundamental. There's one more thing I wanted to mention to you. Ultimately, I believe as a final conclusion, we could establish this point. You agree that near-death experiences are a reality, not just a dream or a mere hallucination.
Yes.
You've lived it personally. I haven't had a close experience. I've contacted my superconsciousness or my consciousness through meditation because there are conscious ways to contact superconsciousness apart from the unconscious, like in a near-death experience. I have made contact. Do you believe this is true? Was your experience real?
If this question can be answered either immediately or with a very long answer, there's nothing more certain than one's own experience.
From your experience, clearly I'm not asking you to justify it scientifically.
What happened? I don't know. How explain it? I don't know. What mechanism?
Wrong.
I don't know.
I'm just telling you, your experience was real for you. Do you think this was real?
I said hyperreal.
Hyperreal. Hyperreal, I agree. It's the same thing our people tell me. Do you agree that within these, the near-death experiences, which is what we have studied in great depth, there are a series of phenomena that we can objectify? What I mean is, we can see that they are true, that you can confidently state they are true, and that quite clearly they demonstrate that what this individual is recounting, at the very least, involves a number of phenomena that we can objectively verify, and that are indeed true.
Yes, absolutely.
So, do you agree with this statement? There are a number of transcendent phenomena that we are unable to objectify, and that even when we approach quantum mechanics, we cannot at all say that quantum mechanics explains them to us, not at all.
For now.
For the time being. But at this very moment, we can state we observe certain analogies concerning the transcendent phenomena experienced by these patients and some fundamental principles of quantum physics. I am not claiming that this is the ultimate explanation. I am saying I see some analogies, a parallelism. It could be that way, or it might not be. In some time, with progress, we'll know if they truly are or not. Do you agree with this? There are other transcendent phenomena, apart from near-death experiences, that we must respect. We cannot treat them as pseudo-scientific things and things of people with their heads in the clouds. They exist, and there are people who in a very serious and scientific way are investigating them. These are manifestations of the same thing that we speak of in another field. What they say about this, that science is the knowledge of the scientist's profound lack of knowledge. We still have so much more to learn.
Do you also agree that quantum biology is an incipient field, but that in the living cell there are quantum phenomena truly scientifically demonstrated? We can say that in biology, quantum mechanics is a phenomenon that holds true quantum phenomena occur.
Sometimes.
Do you also agree with this? I'm really happy to hear that. So, then, another thing.
The closing statement.
Yes, yes. Do you agree that we can speak of a quantum enigma, as Rosenboom and Kuttner describe it? That is to say, they are phenomena or principles that are mathematically certain, we cannot deny them, but they present a very significant interpretive difficulty. This is why we speak of a quantum enigma. I believe no one can be dogmatic about energy collapse, quantum entanglement, or the tunnel effect. One person will say one thing, another will say something else, because there are still dark areas in our understanding. Do you agree with this too?
Yes, boss. Plus, there are still many possibilities. Some people postulate infinite universes. Others postulate that collapse happens due to the intervention of consciousness. Some people postulate that collapse doesn't exist. Others say there are no multiple universes, and it's all an epistemic issue with nothing behind it. So all this is still open. Yes, it's a mystery.
So finally, I'd ask you, do you agree we should keep investigating, but keep investigating with all our passion and seriousness?
Yes, yes.
We must continue investigating because there's so much to say here.
More.
We have two extremely important things.
So what?
The brain and consciousness. And as we've mentioned, how these two things interrelate.
Who cares? Notice?
It's our life, so vital.
Scientific popularizers have done a job, an incredible job, in telling you how wonderful it is to understand what a neutrino is. Bravo, very good. But what happens to our consciousness when we die? What happens to the beings who have left? What happens to the beings who are yet to come? That is much more important than knowing what a neutrino is.
It really is.
We must investigate it and disseminate it in the best way we can and know how. And as we also discussed, we must try to unite, not to turn this into an ego war in the end, where people are saying, no, my vision is this. Perhaps we all have some truth, but we must work together because these are very important things that science now also has the opportunity to study.
I wanted to add a couple of things, or three perhaps. One is science. And now I don't remember who said, the quote, what science does is, it brings better quality ignorance. Better quality ignorance. We know a lot, but we also know what we don't know. And then, another thing that brings out my activist side, the word pseudoscience. Do you know what it is?
Scientism. Scientism is the worst pseudoscience. Those who say, in the name of science, we know this is not so, and this is a charlatan, and this is a lie, and this is foolishness.
In some cases, they might be right, but in most, I dare say no, that they haven't studied it, that they haven't experienced it, and that you can't lock the doors and throw the key into the sea. Therefore, we must open doors and people must come out of the closet so that this can... Look, in the 90s, I was very young, but there was this show called Let's Talk About Sex, right?
Let's talk about sex. Well, we need to talk about death, we need to talk about mind, we need to talk about all of this, and science, the way it has been presented, has normally inhibited this and even cancelled it. So that's why I thank you again, because people like you have opened a giant breach in the trench through which others can now pass and continue doing this work as best we can, because society is very thirsty. The last thing I'll add here is, which we haven't touched upon, there's materialism, but there's also secularism or atheism. For many years, science has been presented as anti-spiritual, anti-religious, and that's not true either. This void people have, who better than you to know, filling theaters, that people are so thirsty to hear these truths. Well, science must also find a way to join this conversation without denying or shouting at people. So again, thank you for your work, and I wish you the best blessings.
You're very generous and a good person to me. Hey, I see your advantage that you're a theoretical physicist, an expert in neuroscience, and you've had a near-death experience. It's a pleasure to hear you, for anyone interested in these topics, but I ask you, surely you've faced direct opposition, I'm absolutely certain. What I mean is, this scientism or these scientists that you're talking about, I'm sure many people, just as it has happened to me, you're bound to face strong opposition because you're creating a new paradigm, you're creating a doubt. They have established certain dogmas and you are shaking those dogmas. So you create an instability that these people try to defend what they want. And instead of seeking what you've said, which is important for all of us to unite, to see if we reach a deeper understanding, what they do is cover up, destroy what's yours, prevent your progress, because it casts doubt on theirs. That is to say, I see a very selfish attitude in them. And because of this, I'm sure you've probably had quite a few. Well, you've probably faced a lot of opposition because you're a very open man. And you have this extraordinary thing. You're a theoretical physicist, a neuroscientist, you understand the brain, and you've had a near-death experience. And you yourself say it's hyper-real. I'm sure there are scientists that you, as a theoretician, would tell, hey, this is hyper-real. They'd say, hey, what are you talking about? I mean, this is marvelous.
What else do you want? Well, I always have more things to add to what you've just said. That's very well put. Look, this opposition, this confrontation, until recently, I used to face it in a somewhat adolescent way, with fighting and with anger. But opposition also helps you grow a great deal.
So you tayo bukera, I know those that you say, well, some of what they say is wrong, but other, look, they're a mirror, a slightly distorted one, but what can I learn?
What's always required, Álex, is a constructive attitude with education and respect. We cannot go there destroying things just so our own can flourish. This is what I do not accept. But I will always accept someone coming to teach me things, helping me advance my knowledge, if we do it through polite and proper dialogue.
And before you said that there are things that maybe where we are wrong, where we need to correct, and that's not heard much either.
And we will change, I'm sure, in a few years' time, many concepts we're discussing now. We will change them. We'll absolutely change them. What else do you want? How do you want to close this interesting...
How are we going to wrap this up? Joseph, you have asked me a great many questions, and I've barely asked you a single one, but I would like to ask you this. How are you doing with what you're working on? How do you feel about this? I mean, it's a gift from heaven, isn't it?
Let me tell you something. I never thought that at my age I'd be in a situation like the one I'm living. I never thought it. It happened so casually, I can't even explain it myself. I like words, and I think of Einstein's words that chance and coincidence don't exist. Everything has a reason. What happens to us, even if we don't understand and think it goes against our life's flow, things happen to me for a reason. I am very afraid about the attention I can give to my family because this demands so much from me. Hours of travel and other things. This keeps me away from my family. I am deeply moved by the comments I receive from so many people. For example, individuals who were about to commit suicide, and after watching our videos and reading our comments, they've said, no, I didn't commit suicide. Saving a life, for me, I believe that justifies absolutely everything. Então, there are many words of gratitude from so many people that this helps them through their grief in such a difficult time of losing loved ones. This is very comforting. I'll tell you because I can say it now. I feel somewhat obliged to continue because of what the Holy Father told me, what we discussed. I had an audience with him, and he said, you must continue. He knows my book, and I'll pray for you to continue. This is logically from the authority of the Holy Father. I have a Christian formation. I have more spirituality at this very moment than a deep religious affiliation. I sometimes prefer to stay home and meditate for 35 minutes or an hour rather than go to Mass where I get distracted and think of other things. Instead, when I'm in my deep meditation and connect with superconsciousness, not always, much less often, but sometimes I feel in bliss. I feel so happy. And I see then that life is a miracle. It's something wonderful, life is. That's why when I see that for young people, the leading cause of death between 15 and 35 is suicide, I think, poor souls, how far they are from knowing this wonder we have within us, which gives meaning to life. You see that it's a miracle, that life is something extraordinary. And you see divinity in all things, huh? And you see every human being as your brother, and love unites you. You are lovingly connected to everything. This is truly wonderful. In this sense, it has helped me so much to grow, to evolve, to help many people. I really like the words of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, huh? He who lives without serving does not serve to live, huh? I truly prefer giving much more than receiving, you know. Material things for me personally, I truly have no needs at all. I have more than I personally need, though I really don't suffer at all for these things. I prefer to give and to help. It has helped me a lot in these ways, but it also has the downside that it's very demanding. And at my age, I'd like to do other things, especially be with my family, and I lose time. But my family also agrees that I continue doing this. I feel enriched and that I'm doing something positive. I'm telling you seriously.
Why do you think your message has had such a brutal impact?
Yeah, I've spoken with many young people, and do you know what they've told me? That even those who attempt suicide have tried and not succeeded. I've spoken with them. I have treated many in my professional life who've drunk hydrochloric acid. They're burnt, and then we have to urgently remove the esophagus and perform an esophagoplasty with stomach, with colon, to reconstruct the digestive tract. An extremely complicated surgery, and I have several cases like these. And I ask them, why do you do it? Then they answer me, Postuyo, currently we have everything material. We have everything, but material things give us a moment of pleasure with a great emotional charge. Oh, I got this, I got that, but immediately the material object that gives you pleasure, after a short time, you get used to it. You already look for another.
This is the ego. It's insatiable. It's insatiable. And between space and space, you have a tremendous void.
You notice that something is missing, the meaning of your life. And then I ask them, do you not have any religious or spiritual belief? They say, we wish we had one. They say, but we see religion is a dogmatism where we are forced to believe things simply by dogma, and this we don't like. For them to tell me I have to believe because God said it, that I must do this and this and this, I don't believe it. So I believe that with my message, what I do with these people is that in a more or less objective manner, with evidence, I tell them that there is something more. I open a door of hope for them, and this is what people are looking for. Those who are in crisis, those who are in mourning, look for support they don't find with religion because it is dogmatic. And I told the Pope this directly. And these dogmatic religions do not belong in today's society. Logically, every society in the Middle Ages, what the church said was real or no one questioned it, and it was believed as dogma, period. Today, people don't want dogmas. Yeah? They're looking for evidence. They need to find this transcendence, but they don't know how to find it. And the path offered until now is religion. But religion today doesn't convince them.
Don't let science become the new faith.
No, God forbid. This simply cannot be.
That's a danger we need to keep an eye on.
Right.
Science says, oh no.
When you die, it'll be paradise.
I agree with that. I absolutely agree. Science has to be a means to help people search for transcendence, which is a totally different thing.
And finally, superconsciousness truly exists. Is it necessary to believe in it in order to experience it?
No need to believe in God to experience it.
When I meditate deeply and connect, I don't think about God, but when I connect with superconsciousness, I get the feeling that the world opens up to me, that I am a part of the world, that I am the world and I am nature, and that I am united with love. Through love, I am united with everything. I see everyone as brothers and sisters, everything as kin. So I see that there is an infinite, enormous love that encompasses everything. You can call this Jehovah, Allah, God, call it whatever you like. It's not a figure like they've painted for us, a man with a beard who judges us. It's an immense love that unites us all.
We are the universe. We are nature. For me, this is God. It is this love that unites us, that brings us together. Not the dogmatic figure they have imposed on us.
See it in your eyes, yes.
Huh? I see it in your eyes when you tell it. Yes, I assure you, huh? I can tell.
I feel it. I feel it. I feel it. What else do you want to say? Thank you. Well, it's truly been a pleasure to share this time, which I believe has been one of the most formative.
As I mentioned at the outset, to have the company of someone who is an expert in quantum physics, in quantum, an expert in neuroscience, in the mechanism, in the intricate mechanisms of what we currently understand in neuroscience. And furthermore, someone who has personally lived through a near-death experience. And then with this ease of dialogue and his ability to explain, it has truly been a pleasure, a real lesson. And I believe it has helped me tremendously to strengthen, to help me express myself and to manifest the message that I believe we have to deliver in a way, well, much more carefully, with much more care, grounding myself much more in what we say. And most importantly, I truly believe that what you've said can do a lot of good for people overall. Álex, I'm certain that many people who have doubts, but who watch this, what you're saying will help them tremendously. And I'm sure that those who are against it, those who, and I accept that there are people who think differently, we've stated from the very beginning that these phenomena can be approached from many different. They surely must perceive in our situation, in yours and mine, a naturalness, a spontaneity, a sincerity, and a willingness to admit when we are wrong and that we need to change, absolutely, and we will change those concepts. And if they teach us things in a logical and respectful manner, the first thing we will do is offer them our endless gratitude because they enhance our message.
What unites us is more than what separates us.
So exactly, it unites us. We are all like family. One, deep down, what we all want is the same, to understand human being as deeply as possible. Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you so much.